What would you do if the man who once stood beside you at an altar deliberately aimed his limo at a puddle just to cover you in mud? Can you imagine that sting, being drenched, mocked, and humiliated by the millionaire who swore he'd protect you? But here's the part he didn't know. The woman he tried to embarrass isn't the powerless nurse he once controlled. She is now married into the very political family that has the power to dismantle his entire empire with a single directive. And what happened next didn't just bring karma, it blasted across national television and shattered his perfect image in real time. Before we proceed, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from to support this channel growth. Thank you. Now let's get into it. Her name was Naomi Brooks. At 32, she had been divorced from Preston Hale for almost a year, a man whose charm masked a streak of cruelty as sharp as broken glass. Preston wasn't just wealthy, he was one of the country's golden boys of tech, the CEO of HaleTech, the man investors worshipped. During their 10-year marriage, he treated Naomi like a decorative accessory he'd grown tired of. "You're lucky I married you," he'd sneer. "Most men with my bank account don't bother with women from your side of town." He mocked her nursing job. He belittled her family. He controlled every detail of her life, finances, friendships, even her clothes. By the time she signed the divorce papers, Naomi wasn't escaping a marriage. She was escaping a cage. After the divorce, Naomi disappeared from his world without a trace. She went back to nursing, quiet days and quiet nights, rebuilding her piece by piece. What Preston never knew, what he never even imagined, was that Naomi met someone whose kindness felt like sunlight compared to the ice she survived. Daniel Adebayo. Soft-spoken. Brilliant. A man who listened more than he talked and saw her humanity long before he learned her history. They fell in love before Naomi discovered the truth that nearly sent her running. "My father," Daniel finally confessed one evening, "is the Prime Minister." Naomi nearly dropped the mug in her hands. But Daniel held her gaze. "I don't care about the spotlight. I care about you." 3 months later, in a quiet garden with only a handful of witnesses, Naomi Brooks became Naomi Adebayo. She kept her name, her job, her humility. She avoided cameras. Most of the country had no idea the Prime Minister's son was married, and even fewer knew his wife was the black nurse from the South Side. And so on a stormy afternoon, as Naomi walked toward the Ministry of Health in a white flowered dress, security discreetly trailing behind her, she had no reason to think her past would collide with her present. Until the black stretch limo lunged around the corner. Until the tires sliced through a deep puddle. Until icy mud exploded upward, drenching her from her shoulders to her shoes. And until the rear window rolled down to reveal the smirk she knew all too well. Preston Hale. This is where everything changed. What would you do if the man who once vowed to love you deliberately drove his limo through a puddle just to humiliate you, unaware that you're now married into the family that controls his entire empire? What would you do if the moment meant to break you became the spark that would soon destroy him, on live television, in front of the entire nation? Because that is exactly what happened to Naomi Brooks. And the mud he splashed that afternoon would stain his legacy far more than her dress. Rain hammered the city with a relentless fury, turning the streets into shimmering mirrors of stormlight. Naomi Brooks tightened her grip on her umbrella and hurried across the boulevard, her white flowered dress fluttering around her legs like a calm defiance against the chaos of the weather. She had never been one for pomp or spectacle. Even today, on her way to deliver a modest 5-minute address at the Ministry of Health, she moved with the same humility she carried when she used to work 12-hour shifts as a nurse. She didn't seek attention. She didn't want headlines. She preferred quiet service to loud praise. 2 discreet security officers, plain clothes, trained eyes, followed several steps behind her. Naomi barely noticed them anymore. They were part of her life now, a result of the private ceremony that had changed everything. A ceremony she had guarded from the world with the same tenderness she guarded her peace. The crosswalk signal blinked green. Naomi stepped forward. That was the exact second the black stretch limo appeared. It rounded the corner far too fast for the slick road. The tires carved through a deep puddle sitting against the curb. Time slowed just enough for Naomi to see the spray rising, dark, cold, heavy. Then it hit her. Mud exploded upward, drenching her in a shock wave of filthy water. It slapped against her dress, her face, her hair. The cold pierced her skin like needles. She gasped, stumbling back, eyes wide, breath stolen. For a heartbeat she couldn't move. Another heartbeat and she wished she hadn't looked up. The tinted rear window glided down in a smooth, almost cinematic roll. Preston Hale. Her ex-husband. Perfect hair, perfect jawline, perfect smirk. Nothing about him had changed except the deeper arrogance etched into his posture. He leaned out the window and laughed. Not a nervous laugh. Not a surprised laugh. A vicious, entertained laugh, the kind he used to aim at her behind closed doors. "Still dressing like you shopped at the bargain bin, Naomi?" he jeered. "Still walking everywhere? Still poor?" Naomi's breath trembled. She felt that old familiar sting, humiliation mixed with the bitterness of past wounds that had never fully healed. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. A teenager on the sidewalk had her phone raised, live streaming the entire incident. The comments were already scrolling so fast the screen blurred. Preston didn't care. He didn't notice. He never noticed anything that didn't involve him. He gave her one last mocking grin, then tapped the car's ceiling. "Drive!" The limo sped off, tires hissing through the rain, leaving Naomi soaked, shaking, and silent in the middle of the crosswalk. For a moment, she couldn't move. For a moment, all she could hear was the echo of his laughter, louder than the storm. Then, "Ma'am, are you all right?" Her security detail rushed toward her, hands already reaching for earpieces, prepared to intervene. Naomi stepped back quickly. "No, no, please. Don't cause a scene." Her voice cracked, but she forced steadiness into it. The last thing she wanted was escalation. Not here. Not now. People were staring. Some with pity. Some with curiosity. Some with their phones up, trying to decide if they should record too. Naomi took a breath so deep it hurt. She pressed a hand to her chest, grounding herself, remembering, "You are not the woman he broke. You are not the woman he abandoned." A gentle voice interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Here," a stranger murmured, stepping close, offering her a clean towel from her tote bag. She leaned in and whispered, "I don't know if you've checked the live stream yet, but I think millions are watching this." Naomi's heart lurched. Millions. She wiped her face slowly, the mud smearing in streaks across her cheeks. Her security detail exchanged glances, sharp, professional, concerned. They knew what this could become. They knew what this would become. "Let's get you inside, Mrs." one of them began. Naomi cut him off with a gentle shake of her head. "Not here," she whispered. "Please." She followed them away from the crowd, steps shaky, dress dripping, her dignity clinging to her like a fragile thread. But as she walked, something dark and cold settled in her stomach. Not pain. Not fear. Something heavier. The certainty that this moment was no longer hers alone. And she was right. The live stream would go viral before she even reached the ministry steps. The nation would soon learn exactly who she was. And Preston Hale would soon learn exactly who he had just humiliated. Before Naomi Brooks became the daughter-in-law of the Prime Minister, she was trapped for 10 years in the gilded cage of Preston Hale. Preston barely slept the night before. The walls of his penthouse felt smaller, tighter, as if the world itself were closing in. By morning, the message he'd been dreading arrived, not through lawyers, not through PR handlers, but directly from the government. It was short, brutal, non-negotiable. A formal, televised apology is required. Live broadcast. Failure to comply will result in immediate termination of all HaleTech government contracts. No pleasantries. No warning. Just a verdict. Preston read it 3 times, chest rising and falling like someone struggling for air. His empire, his legacy, balanced on a single humiliating act he never imagined he'd be forced to perform. An apology to Naomi, the woman he'd mocked, the woman he believed beneath him, the woman he splashed for fun. He slammed his fist onto the table, but rage couldn't rewrite consequences. His board made it clear he would obey, or he'd be removed before noon. And so, Preston Hale, once untouchable, found himself being driven toward the National Broadcasting Studio like a criminal on his way to sentencing. The studio lights were unkind, harsh, unforgiving, white-hot against his sweating skin. Makeup techs had attempted to dull the shine on his forehead, but nothing could hide the truth. Preston looked like a man being marched to the gallows. Across from him sat Mara Dixon, one of the most feared interviewers in the country, known for dismantling corrupt CEOs with precision. Her presence alone made politicians fidget, executives tremble. Today, she looked almost hungry. "Thank you for being here, Mr. Hale," she said, voice smooth but glacial. He forced a smile. Of course. But under the table, his hands were shaking. The cameras hadn't even begun rolling. A producer raised a hand. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. Red light on. Millions watching." Preston swallowed. The downfall had begun. Mara didn't ease into it. She lunged. "Mr. Hale, let's get right to the point. You deliberately drove through a puddle and splashed a woman. You then rolled down your window and laughed. Do you deny this?" Preston blinked rapidly. I wouldn't say deliberately. It was bad timing." Mara tilted her head. "The video shows you laughing." "I was laughing at something else." "A coincidence," she said flatly. "And this woman, you claim you didn't recognize her?" His jaw clenched. It was raining. Hard to see. Mara leaned forward, voice sharpening. "You didn't recognize your own ex-wife?" The question struck like a blade. Preston's throat bobbed. It happened quickly. I wasn't expecting." "So you accidentally splashed her," Mara pressed, "and accidentally laughed at her, and accidentally mocked her clothing and background?" Sweat collected at his temples. "I think you're framing this unfairly," he snapped. She didn't flinch. "Is this the first time," she asked slowly, "you've humiliated her?" The studio air froze. Preston's mouth opened, closed, opened again. This is not relevant." "It is extremely relevant to the public," she said. "To the ethics committee. And to the millions watching who witnessed your cruelty." His attempt at a rebuttal died on his tongue. He inhaled shakily, realizing he was losing. Not the argument, his entire life. Across the city, Naomi sat on her sofa, Daniel's arm wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't watch out of revenge. Not out of pleasure. Only disbelief. Only sorrow for what was, and gratitude for what her life had become. Preston looked so small on the screen. So fragile. So completely unlike the man who once towered over her with wealth, ego, and entitlement. "I don't want this for him," she whispered. "I never wished this." Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "You didn't cause this. His actions did." Naomi nodded, but her heart ached all the same. She never wanted a spectacle. She never wanted to be the center of a nation's outrage. She just wanted to live quietly. Now millions were watching her past unravel in real time. Back in the studio, Mara delivered the blow everyone was waiting for. "Mr. Hale," she said, folding her hands, "the public is demanding accountability. The government is demanding accountability. And the woman you humiliated deserves accountability. The camera zoomed in on Preston's face, glossy-eyed, jaw trembling, pride collapsing like a crumbling tower. "We will give you this opportunity," Mara continued. "Look into that camera and apologize to Naomi Brooks Adebayo directly." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours. Preston's throat constricted, his palms slick with sweat. He stared into the lens as if staring into the sun. His voice cracked. I'm sorry, Naomi." Mara didn't look satisfied. Neither did the country. But it was done. The apology had been forced out of him like poison from a wound. The fallout was instant. Social media erupted. Millions posting clips with mocking captions, side-by-side comparisons of his arrogance and collapse. HaleTech's stock ticker began plummeting during the broadcast, numbers dropping in real time at the bottom of the screen. News commentators whispered predictions of disaster. Financial analysts called it the most rapid public unraveling of a CEO in a decade. By the time the cameras cut, Preston sat stiff and hollow-eyed, his empire burning beneath him. Not because Naomi wanted it, but because karma had arrived, live in HD, and the entire world watched him fall. By the time Naomi reached home that evening, her dress still faintly stained despite 2 careful washings, the world had already changed. She didn't know it yet. Not fully. She sensed it only in the way the security team spoke in short bursts over their earpieces and the way Daniel's phone buzzed non-stop. But the real storm? It was already exploding across the internet. The teenager's livestream had started modestly, watched by only a handful of friends. But the moment Preston Hale's laugh, sharp, cruel, manic, echoed through the microphone, everything shifted. The mud, the scream, the deliberate splash, the limo's sleek retreat. It was cinematic in its ugliness. Within an hour. 2.3 million views. Within 2 hours. 12 million. Hashtags detonated like fireworks. Hashtag Mudgate. Hashtag Prime Minister's daughter-in-law. Hashtag Hale humiliation. Comment sections roared. Who treats any woman like this? Disgusting. Not just any woman, this is Naomi Brooks Adebayo? He ruined himself on camera. Someone call the PM, this man needs consequences. Anger, disbelief, and morbid fascination merged into one unstoppable tidal wave. By Tuesday morning, the story had jumped from social media chaos to mainstream frenzy. Every major network played the clip in slow motion, freeze-framing Naomi's shock, Preston's twisted grin, the mud staining her pristine white dress. Reporters dug into archives, pulling up old photos of Naomi at health galas, charity summits, and one carefully guarded image from her wedding where her face was partly obscured. Still, it was enough. Breaking news. Prime Minister's daughter-in-law splashed by millionaire ex-husband. Special report. Was this targeted or pure cruelty? Panel discussion. Should public officials' families be protected from harassment? Outside HaleTech headquarters, cameras swarmed like hornets. Everything was spiraling. Preston, in typical Preston fashion, treated the unfolding disaster as an inconvenience, not a catastrophe. He barged into his board meeting that morning, waves of reporters screaming his name behind the glass doors. He didn't care. He was smirking, energized by attention. "Relax," he told the board. "It's exaggerated. Just me having a bit of fun." He reenacted the moment, leaning back, lifting an imaginary window, mimicking his own hateful laugh. A few executives forced smiles, terrified to challenge him. Then one of them, quiet, pale, trembling, pressed play on the full video. Room dark. Volume loud. Preston's voice booming. "Still wearing cheap clothes, Naomi? Still poor. Pathetic." Silence fell. A cold, heavy silence that made Preston's grin collapse. No one laughed. No one even breathed. Preston felt the first flicker of fear. Meanwhile, at Downing Street, the reaction was swift and far less forgiving. It wasn't Naomi's marital connection that infuriated the Prime Minister. It was the sheer inhumanity. A man in a position of wealth and power humiliating a woman he once vowed to love, publicly, gleefully, intentionally. Behind closed doors, the Ethics Committee convened an emergency session. One official read the report with shaking hands. Another whispered, "This is cruelty, on camera." Off the record, behind layers of protocol, the Prime Minister gave one quiet order. Suspend all contracts with HaleTech until further notice. £280 million in ongoing digital infrastructure work. £90 million in approved future partnerships. Frozen. Just like that. A single administrative keystroke that sent financial markets rumbling beneath Preston's feet. While the world dissected her humiliation frame by frame, Naomi sat in the living room of her quiet home, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She didn't want cameras. She didn't want headlines or hashtags. She didn't want any of this. "I never wanted a scandal," she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel sat beside her, one arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. "You didn't cause one." "But—" "No," his voice deepened. "Preston's cruelty did. Not your existence." She swallowed, guilt pressing against her chest. People are losing jobs. Companies are reacting. The internet is on fire. "None of that is your burden," he said. "Your dignity matters too, Naomi." This time, the world finally saw what he is. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. She wasn't weak. She wasn't that woman anymore. But reliving it, on millions of screens, was a different kind of pain. By Wednesday afternoon, HaleTech's stock plummeted. Investors called in frantic waves. Business partners reconsidered. A major bank threatened to pull financing. Inside the HaleTech tower, the board held emergency sessions, shifting from discomfort to panic to anger. Preston slammed doors, shouted at executives, fired 2 PR assistants out of pure rage. "Why should I apologize?" he barked. "She's nothing." His PR chief stared at him, horrified. "You do realize who she is now? You splashed the Prime Minister's daughter-in-law. That doesn't make her important." "It does to the country," the PR chief snapped. "It does to the government. It does to the markets. You're not a king, Preston. You're a liability." For the first time in years, Preston felt something unfamiliar pulse through his chest. Fear. Real fear. Because for the first time, he was beginning to understand. This wasn't a PR problem. This was an extinction-level event, and he had created it. Alone. The mud still clung to Naomi's dress. The sting of Preston's laughter still echoed in her bones. But humiliation, no matter how sharp, was familiar. It wasn't new. It wasn't surprising. It was a ghost from a life she had fought to escape. Because before she became the daughter-in-law of the Prime Minister, Naomi Brooks had lived a very different story, one built on struggle, sacrifice, and a decade-long marriage to a man who believed she should be grateful to exist in his shadow. This is where that story began. Naomi was born on the South Side, in a modest brick duplex squeezed between a barbershop and a laundromat. She grew up to the sound of police sirens and gospel choirs, switching between danger and hope in the same neighborhood block. Her mother worked double shifts at a community clinic. Her father fixed cars in their driveway to make ends meet. Money was tight, always, but love was abundant, and resilience was the currency everyone shared. From the time she was 10, Naomi knew she wanted to work in healthcare. She spent afternoons watching her mother wrap bandages for neighbors who couldn't afford hospital visits. "You can save a life with your hands," her mother would say. Naomi believed her. She became the first in her family to finish university, graduating as a registered nurse. While her peers celebrated with vacations and fancy dinners, Naomi dove straight into 12-hour shifts on the trauma floor. She supported her parents, paid off her younger brother's school fees, and still found time to volunteer at free clinics. Whenever someone asked why she worked so hard, she would smile and say, "Because someone needs me." She never imagined how badly she would one day need someone herself. She met Preston Hale on a night when exhaustion had blurred her vision and hope seemed like a luxury. She had gone to a charity gala she could barely afford to attend, invited by a coworker who insisted she needed a night out. She wore a simple navy dress she'd bought on clearance. Everyone else looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. And then Preston appeared. Tall, polished, handsome. A millionaire entrepreneur whose charm radiated like warm light. He approached her with ease, slipping into conversation as though they had known each other for years. "You're the most genuine person in this room," he told her. "Everyone else feels plastic." Naomi blushed, unsure whether to believe him. Preston pursued her relentlessly after that. Flowers delivered to her hospital. Surprise lunches. Weekend getaways she'd never dared dream of. It felt like a romance movie swirling around her, the rich man who fell for the hardworking girl. They married just 1 year later. And the dream ended the very next day. The cruelty didn't come in slaps or shouts. It came in soft voices and sharp words, in private comments said with a smile, in the way he held her hand too tightly in public, as though controlling a leash. "You should be grateful," he would murmur in her ear. "I married beneath my class." When she came home from double shifts with aching feet and swollen hands, he'd smirk. "I don't know why you keep working that little nurse job. It makes you look desperate." He monitored every expense, questioned every outing, chose her wardrobe, calling certain dresses too cheap and others too attention-seeking. At parties, he'd introduce her with a laugh. "This is Naomi, my charity case wife." When she confronted him, he would sigh dramatically. "Don't make everything about race, Naomi. You're being sensitive." But he never made those jokes about his wealthy white friends' wives. Never degraded anyone the way he degraded her. Never joked about anyone else's background or body or family. And that silence, those selective cruelties, spoke louder than anything he said aloud. Naomi stayed for 10 years. Not because she was weak, but because she believed people could change. Because she remembered the charming man from the gala. Because she didn't want to fail at the marriage she had fought so hard to build. But Preston didn't want a partner. He wanted a prop. The day she left, she carried nothing but a suitcase of clothes and a hollow ache in her chest. Preston didn't try to stop her. He didn't even look at her. "Good riddance," he said. "I'll find someone who matches my status." His words stung, but her freedom tasted sweeter. Naomi returned to the one place that had ever made her feel safe, her work. She threw herself into nursing again, taking shifts nobody else wanted, tending to the forgotten and the overlooked, healing in the process of helping others heal. Her life was quiet, peaceful, small in the best possible way. Then, one afternoon, during a crowded medical summit, a little boy collapsed in the middle of the conference hall. Naomi rushed forward without hesitation, kneeling beside him, checking his airway, working with steady hands even as the crowd panicked. A man knelt beside her, not interfering, just offering support, holding the child's mother's hand, speaking softly, calmly. That man was Daniel Adebayo. After the child was stabilized and taken by paramedics, Daniel approached her. "You work with grace under pressure," he said. Naomi shrugged, embarrassed. "It's just my job." "No," Daniel smiled. "It's your gift." They talked, and talked again the next day, and the next. Their connection wasn't fireworks, it was warmth. Simple. Steady. A feeling of being seen without being judged. It took months before Daniel finally gathered the courage to confess the truth. My father is the Prime Minister. Naomi's heart stopped. The Prime Minister? Yes, he said, watching her carefully. Does that change anything? She thought about Preston, all the wealth, all the power, all the cruelty. Then she looked at Daniel, gentle, sincere, unassuming. Not unless you're going to be weird about my job, she said. Daniel laughed. Your job is one of the reasons I fell for you. 3 months later, they were married in a tiny, private ceremony. No cameras. No press. Just vows whispered softly and joy shared quietly. Security became part of her life, not for show, but for safety. And though she now belonged to one of the most powerful families in the nation, Naomi chose to keep her identity hidden, living simply, privately, gratefully. Until the day Preston Hale sped through a puddle and unknowingly splashed mud over the Prime Minister's daughter-in-law, rekindling a story she thought she'd left behind. The fallout hit before the cameras had even cooled. As the broadcast replayed across every network, government departments moved with decisive, merciless efficiency. By dawn, the ultimatum had expired, the apology deemed insufficient, and the verdict delivered. Every HaleTech government contract, nearly £500 million worth, was formally terminated. By mid-morning, the consequences accelerated beyond anything Preston had imagined. Banks, skittish and calculating, froze the company's lines of credit pending stability assessments. A polite phrase for "we don't trust you anymore." Investors, furious at watching their portfolios bleed out in real time, filed preliminary lawsuits. The market reacted with savage enthusiasm, punishing HaleTech the moment trading opened. In a single gruesome hour, the stock plunged 62%, the red line dropping like a stone into a dark well. Preston watched the numbers collapse from the tinted corner office he'd once treated like a throne. With every tick downward, his breathing grew harder, shallower, like he was watching pieces of his identity tear loose and scatter. He tried calling anyone with influence, senior partners, old allies, political donors, but suddenly everyone was in a meeting. Even his most loyal investors returned his messages with sterile, lawyer-approved statements. For the first time in years, Preston Hale was alone. The board convened in a frantic emergency session. 4 years, they'd tolerated his arrogance, his excesses, his delusions of invulnerability because he made them money. But now he was poison, radioactive, an active liability dragging them under. Preston stormed into the meeting room uninvited, face red, tie askew, demanding to speak. Demanding loyalty. Demanding respect. What he received instead was a vote. Unanimous. Effective immediately, he was removed as CEO of HaleTech. He laughed at first, a brittle, desperate sound. Then he shouted, about legacy, about loyalty, about betrayal. But security was already stepping forward. They kept their expressions professional, neutral, as they escorted him. Preston Hale, titan of industry, self-proclaimed untouchable, out of the building he'd once believed he was. Outside, reporters swarmed, microphones swaying like spears. Cameras flashed. Preston shielded his face, shouting for them to get away. His voice cracked. The footage was live-streamed within minutes. The world watched his undoing. Naomi did not celebrate. While headlines churned and social media commentators crafted their brutally efficient jokes about Preston's collapse, Naomi focused on something that mattered far more than vengeance: rebuilding. With Daniel's steady presence beside her, she poured her energy into a nationwide healthcare initiative, something she had quietly dreamed about long before the mud, the cameras, the humiliation. Now, with the public support behind her, the Prime Minister's resources at her disposal, and her own renewed sense of purpose, she moved with determined grace. Communities welcomed her. Hospitals partnered with her. Volunteers signed up in droves. The media, once ravenous for scandal, shifted tone entirely. praising the calm dignity with which she had carried herself throughout the chaos. She never framed herself as a victim, never sought pity, never spoke a word against Preston on record. People respected her for that, admired her for that, and slowly, Naomi felt something inside her settle. Not triumph, something quieter, deeper. Peace. Preston returned to his penthouse that night, an opulent space that felt suddenly enormous and hollow. He dropped his keys on the marble floor and didn't bother picking them up. Empty bottles from the previous night still littered the tables. He added another before even shrugging off his jacket. He sat alone in the dark, illuminated only by the cold city lights bleeding through the glass. His phone, once a constant source of praise, power, and opportunity, buzzed only with news alerts chronicling his own ruin. For the first time, he allowed the truth to crack through the armor he'd built over years of bravado. He had done this. He had mocked her, dismissed her, humiliated her. He had convinced himself she was small because it made him feel big. Now, stripped of the empire he'd built atop arrogance and carelessness, he saw it. The woman he had once promised to love was the one he had underestimated most. And that underestimation had cost him everything. His downfall was not Naomi's revenge. It was his own doing. On the morning the first phase of Naomi's healthcare initiative launched, she stood beside Daniel. The press gathered before them. The air buzzed with anticipation, cameras blinking like stars. Daniel squeezed her hand once before stepping aside. She approached the podium, her posture steady, her expression soft. Flashbulbs sparked. She didn't flinch. Naomi spoke, not about scandal, not about the past, not even about resilience, but about service, community, and healing. Her voice carried without strain, calm and assured. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave. A quiet smile touched her lips. She had risen, not through revenge, not through spectacle, but through the strength she had reclaimed, the compassion she refused to let go of, and the future she chose to build. And this time, she was standing on her own terms. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. I know your time is valuable, and I really appreciate you sticking with it. Now, I spent hours putting this video together, writing, editing, making sure every detail was perfect just for you. If you enjoyed it, the least you can do is hit that like button and subscribe. Seriously, it takes just a second, but it makes a world of difference for someone who poured their heart and time into this. Don't let all that effort go unnoticed. Show some love and support.